Does it seem like nuns are having a moment? Because you sort of think nuns probably hit their peak in, what, the 14th century? The 18th century? But this is kind of starting to feel like Miami Heat Ray Allen, where, you know, you think his best days are behind him, but then he hits that shot and you're like, oh man, Ray Allen's still one of the guys that matter. And I think we're pretty much there with nuns in horror movies, right? Maybe we thought that with 2018's The Nun, the subgenre had given us all it had to offer. Perhaps The Nun 2, which was one of many valleys in last year's horror landscape, solidified this belief for you. But nuns are back with a vengeance, folks. Specifically, nuns who get freaky and or pregnant. Paul Verhoeven's Benedetta, the Sydney Sweeney film Immaculate from earlier this year, and now we are treated to one of the best horror prequels I can remember. So welcome back, everybody. I'm Jake, the Scary Story Guy, and today we are talking about The First Omen, which is a prequel to the classic 1976 horror film The Omen, which I will try very hard not to refer to as The First Omen during this video, even though it technically is The First Omen. But before we do that, just a quick plug to like this video and subscribe to this channel, especially if you picked up on any of those piping hot Bill Simmons references from earlier. But now let's dive in. So The First Omen is actually the 6th film in the Omen franchise, although it's the first one to come out in 18 years. The original, with Gregory Peck in '76, was well received and has since kind of become considered a classic of horror cinema. The 3 films that followed it, however, not so much. There was a 2006 remake of the original, got mixed reviews, and there the franchise has laid dormant for nearly 2 decades. But now The First Omen is a prequel to that original 1976 film. And basically, if you haven't seen the original Omen, this is going to be a bit of a spoiler for you, but a high-ranking American diplomat and his wife lose their baby during childbirth. But before the wife learns about this, she's still in recovery, a priest comes up to the father and says, hey, we've got this orphan baby, just born, no parents, and it needs a home. So instead of having your wife think that her baby just died, why don't you just take this baby, raise it as your own, just take the secret to your grave. So that's what he does. But the new kid, Damien, is sort of the Antichrist and the spawn of Satan. So that goes about as well as you'd expect. And the First Omen prequel reveals how this child, Damien, came to be a ward of the church in the first place. Now, the first thing I've got to say is I'm not really a fan of this franchise. I've only seen the first one, actually. I would say I liked it fine, but probably not as well as your average horror fan seems to. Just a modest 3 stars out of 5, I guess. I haven't seen the others. I'm not interested in seeing the others. However, I will give a brief shout out to the novel Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, which rips very heavily from The Omen in its plot. I've seen the TV series for that as well. It's fine. It's pretty good, but the novel Good Omens is a masterpiece and one of the funniest books I've ever read in my life. All this to say, I didn't go into The First Omen expecting to have my socks knocked off, and truth be told, I didn't have my socks knocked off, but I will say I was a lot more impressed than I thought I'd be. Last year was a year of really lackluster horror film properties, to say the least. We had an Insidious movie, an Exorcist movie, a Nun movie, we had a Winnie the Pooh horror movie, for God's sakes, and they were all just abominable. But this is simply in a different league. So The First Omen was made by Arkasha Stevenson. Don't worry if that name sounds unfamiliar. It's the first movie she's ever made. And she really goes for it here in some ways that I appreciated. There are so many unique shots and creative transitions. This doesn't feel like someone just kind of cutting their teeth. This feels like a seasoned veteran who's just playing around with her craft. Not all of her punches are knockout blows, but there's just a level of creative kind of ingenuity to Stevenson's work that I found really refreshing, frankly. So Nell Tiger Free, what a name, stars as Margaret, an American novitiate who is recruited to a convent in Rome by a cardinal who knew her when she was a kid. She looked really familiar to me. I looked it up after. It turns out she played Marcella Baratheon, one of the 3 ill-fated love children of Jamie and Cersei in Game of Thrones. And she's quite good in this, although she does maybe get a little upstaged by some of the other names in this cast, especially Bill Nighy, who is one of my all-time favorite actors. That's not Bill Nye the Science Guy, by the way. We're talking Bill Nighy. Very different. We've also got Ralph Ineson, whose insanely good performance in The Witch means I will sign up for any horror movie he's ever in. I've also been playing Diablo 4 on the Xbox lately, and he lends his ridiculously epic speaking voice to that, which I'm happy about. And speaking of Game of Thrones, we've even got a brief appearance from the legendary Charles Dance, Tywin Lannister himself, although you can't help but feel like you wish he was in this way more. So, we've established this is a well-made movie, a well-acted movie, but the real question, is it scary? And I think my answer would be, it's disturbing. Stevenson isn't going for spooky a lot here. There's an absence of cheap jump scares, which I quite appreciated. It's really a female-centric body horror film. Most of the discomfort that we experience is around the, we'll call it, unpleasantness of childbirth, particularly when a woman's consent or agency is being violated in some way. If you've seen Possession, a horror movie from the 80s starring Isabelle Adjani, I think her name is, or that's how you pronounce it, but it's very similar vibes. There's one scene in particular that just feels like a direct homage to that film. And there's another scene that felt more like an homage to that childbirth movie we all had to watch in 10th grade health class, which, by the way, very nearly landed this movie with an NC-17 rating. I'm not totally sure how they avoided that, actually. So you're not going to be terrified in the moment, I would say, but if what I just described sounds, you know, not like your cup of tea, you may want to think twice about this one. I've got to say, I'm really glad it didn't get slapped with the NC-17 because this movie was not only critically acclaimed, but it did pretty well at the box office. It just barely got a lucrative deal to appear on Hulu. So, you know, more of that. Keep giving your money to movies with some actual creative juices flowing through them. Alas, this movie may have ruined the phrase creative juices for me. Guys, at the end of the day, The First Omen probably isn't going to wow you, but it's just a huge, huge step up from the horror franchise films of last year. It's memorably dark, it's very well acted and atmospheric, and it's helmed by a first-time director who doesn't seem like a first-time director at all. I hope she makes more stuff. I will be there. I'm gonna give The First Omen 3.5 stars out of 5. Alright guys, as always, stay tuned for more spooky content coming soon, but in the meantime, thank you for watching this video, and here's hoping you survive to see the next one.